Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. A lot to get into this morning. So first of all, the hunger war is becoming absolutely unbearable in Gaza. And this comes as Lloyd Austin was in Israel. Actually, a whole parade of U.S. officials are in Israel. And he is once again warning Israel to protect civilians. So we'll get into all of that. Also, this is a huge deal, not getting a lot of attention yet, but I think that it will. U.S. Steel has sold to a Japanese company. Some politicians are already speaking out against this, as well as the labor union that represents those workers, so we will break all of that down for you. We also have a new bombshell report from ProPublica about, once again, Clarence Thomas, all the money that he's taken, and some of the context for when and why that money began to flow. So very interesting report there that we should dig into. There's also a new deep dive into the perplexing calm of the Biden campaign. Apparently, at least their public face, they claim they're not worried. I don't know how they could be not worried, given the polling that we have seen. So we'll get into that. And also, most importantly, Saagar and I are going to tackle that very controversial map from the new Civil War movie. So a lot to talk about today.
I've been doing a lot of war games in my head, and you guys should get ready for some risk level analysis. This is going to be fun.
Yes, and you've picked a side already as well.
I've picked a side. I've declared my allegiance. Okay, before we get to that, though, we've got our yearly discount, which remains there for our membership. It's going to be a crazy year, so if you can help us build up for that. As a thank you, and as always part of our premium subscription, we release big ticket interviews to our premium subscribers first. So we have Norm Finkelstein actually returning to the show. That will be dropping sometime later next week. Early, it will come to the premiums, and Tucker Carlson as well. He's going to be doing a sit down, and so we will release all of that to our premium subscribers. If you want to watch it first, breakingpoints.com, you get early access to that, and you get to help us build, and you've got that yearly membership that remains on discount. So there you go. Go ahead and take advantage.
All right, so let's go ahead and get to the news out of Israel, starting with, as I mentioned, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was there yesterday and, among other comments, once again, warning Israel about civilians. Let's take a listen.
Democracies are stronger and more secure when we uphold the law of war. And as I've said, protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral duty and a strategic imperative. So we will continue to stand up for Israel's bedrock right to defend itself. And we will also continue to urge the protection of civilians during conflict and to increase the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. That's important as Israel fights to dismantle the Hamas terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. And it will also be crucial for our work with our allies and partners after the fighting stops.
This, of course, very similar to what any parade of U.S. officials have been saying, have been leaking to the press, etc. Has Israel cared? Have they listened to any of it? No, because there's no teeth behind it, ultimately. It's just words. There has been no indication that there are actual red lines. In fact, they've said quite the opposite, that there are no red lines for Israel's conduct in their assault on Gaza. So we can see throughout the region some of the fallout in terms of U.S. opinion of the U.S. throughout the region. This was a pretty fascinating poll from Barometer of Tunisia. Put this up on the screen. This was flagged by Dr. Trita Parsi. So before Gaza, views of the U.S., this is again in Tunisia, which is kind of representative of a lot of the countries in the region, the Arab countries in the region. The view of the U.S. was 40% positive. After Gaza, 10% positive. Approval of Joe Biden, pre-Gaza, 29%, not great. After Gaza, 6%. And one of the things, Saagar, that comes out here is that actually views of Israel were already dim. They haven't really changed. It's the views of the U.S. that have absolutely fallen off the cliff. And on the other side, views of China. Oh, what's the favorability rating of China in Tunisia? 75%.
Yeah.
Favorability rating of Russia in Tunisia, 53%. So countries that have taken a different approach to this conflict have seen a boon to their ratings, and the U.S. and anyone else really associated with the U.S. or like Saudi Arabia, who had been approaching Israel and trying to normalize relations, their approval ratings have fallen off a cliff because of our association with Israel.
One of the reasons Tunisia is very important is that that was where the so-called Arab Spring began, the Tunisian Revolution, of course, back in 2010. And Trita is very correct here in terms of looking at the North Arab states like Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, any of these, Algeria, these countries, largely because they're not democracies per se, but popular sentiment matters a lot more in terms of how it affects the government. And these are obviously larger Arab populations in the region. As to why should we should care at all, well, not only does it affect, overall U.S. soft power, but it's also a pretty decent barometer for terrorism and for feelings of terrorism against the U.S. It also would highlight if we do get involved in some sort of broader war in the Middle East, when Yemen, who is going to side with whom, which governments can declare their allegiance, what level of support, bases, where U.S. troops will be safe if they're forward deployed. These are all the things you got to think about overall U.S. support. And this actually fits with a broader point John Mearsheimer's been making on Israel now for basically decades, ever since he wrote his book in 2000, I think it was 2006, somewhere around there, was that by polarizing all U.S. policy in the Middle East around two central subjects of the last 20 years, but also the last 75, Israel and Iraq, we have done ourselves a tremendous disservice because it has ignited a tremendous amount of popular sentiment against us. And at the same time, we try to, go around this by just making deals with dictators. And these dictators have control, but they're not absolute monarchs in the way that we might like to think. So how these people think about us matters a lot in terms of our mobility in the region, the safety of our troops, and also of terrorism generally.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and sort of exposes the lie of the idea that actually the thing that is in the interest of our security is to give blanket unconditional support to Israel. So let's take a look at some of the actions that our government is currently co-signing. Can put this up on the screen. These are images that just came out. This is from the AP of an aid truck being raided. You can see people running after it, climbing on top of it. This comes as there is widespread critical levels of hunger throughout the Gaza Strip. We can put this next piece up on the screen, guys. Human Rights Watch just came out with a new report saying that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war in Gaza. They go on to say that this is based on not only the actions, the level of hunger, also the stated intentions of Israeli officials. Now, you might say at this point, like, well, that's kind of obvious, but it was important for them to do an in-depth investigation and see what people were experiencing on the ground. The UN World Food Program reported on December 6th that 9 out of 10 households in northern Gaza and 2 out of 3 households in southern Gaza had spent at least one full day and night without food. International humanitarian law, of course, they point out, or the laws of war, prohibit the starvation of civilians as a method of warfare. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court provides that intentionally starving civilians by depriving them of objects indispensable to their survival, including willfully impeding relief supplies, is a war crime. Criminal intent does not require the attacker's admission, but can also be inferred from the totality of the circumstances of the military campaign. Of course, we know that at the very start of this war, Israeli officials announced they were launching a complete siege. We know that conditions have only continued to deteriorate, and there are now some scattered reports coming out of people actually starving to death, children in particular, though those haven't been completely confirmed. If this continues in this direction, though, you can certainly expect that will be an additional cost and toll on civilians of this war. And Saagar, in addition to this, the Washington Post, which we can put up on the screen, is taking a look at the spread of disease. This is actually something Ryan has been highlighting from early on, because recall, you got no fuel, you have no sanitation facilities. You have now 1.9 million residents of Gaza who've been forcibly displaced, people living in crowded circumstances, in shelters, outside, in tents. So it is just a horrific situation in terms of the spread of disease. And then you add to that the fact that so many hospitals have been attacked. There's very little in the way of medical supplies. So things that should be easily treatable, there's no ability to treat them. Let me just read you a little bit of this, because this report was really heartbreaking to give you a sense of what this is like for people who are living through this on the ground. One family, they talk about how Israeli strikes killed one of Tahani Abu Tama's sons and one of her brothers, but she fears a different killer is stalking what's left of her family, disease. Abu Tama's 2-year-old daughter is suffering from diarrhea, vomits, sneezes, and is shaking from the cold and lack of food. The mother of 6 told the Washington Post, "The child asks me for food all the time, but I am unable to provide, which forces me to give her anything, even if it is contaminated." And once again, there is no ability to treat this child. So she's extremely concerned about her ability to survive. Staph infections, chickenpox, rashes, urinary tract infections, meningitis, mumps, scabies, measles, and food poisoning are all on the rise. The World Health Organization particularly concerned about bloody diarrhea, jaundice, and respiratory infections. The UN is tracking 14 different diseases with epidemic potential. That is according to Reuters.
Yeah, actually, one of the stats that really jumped out to me is that currently, of the 1.3 million Gazans who live in shelters, there is an average of 1 toilet for every 220 people and a shower for every 4,500. So unsanitary conditions, obviously, and already it was one of the more densely populated regions on planet Earth, and it demonstrates, too, about the humanitarian disaster of which will continue if this is allowed. The real issue, I think, here is about something we continue to highlight, or at least I've been trying to make this point, which is really unfortunate. Probably the worst has yet to come. This is bombing. We have lawlessness, as we saw with the aid convoys. Hamas doesn't care about the population. Israel doesn't really care about the population. They're basically fending for themselves. You've got the blockade and the Rafah crossing, which continues to be completely closed, both by the Egyptian government and the Israeli government on the other side. So these people are really stuck, and the issue, I think, is at the vacuum of where this is all going to emerge. We saw a lot of this play out in Iraq immediately after the so-called liberation, where we had full-blown looting across the city, and similar, because we were stupid and we fired the Ba'ath Party and de-Baathification, we didn't have civil and city services. They took well over a year to come back. And Iraq was, frankly, a far more developed place and, had a lot more governance, and they had at least access to some cross-border trade and other things that were available to them afterwards. So this is a really, really bad situation, and I do think it demonstrates that a lot of the day after Gaza situation is going to come down to genuine, Krystal, civil administration. The security situation will almost be a secondary concern, because these amount of people living in these types of conditions, this is one where it's a powder keg, not only of terrorism, but I mean, who knows? You could see a full-blown run at the border to Egypt. You could see, a swarming of an aid truck today. Imagine 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now. So that is where I think the big flashing red light on this is going to be. And I mean, look, the U.S. is not stupid. That's why Lloyd Austin began with all of those comments. He can see it very clearly. The only question is, what U.S. policy is going to compel a change and a difference? And of course, that hasn't materialized yet.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.